Welcome back. Now let's take a look at how the markets have performed. It certainly was a bit of a mixed bag earlier on this morning. Of course, in the United States, it seems that US lawmakers are unable to thrash out a proper deal, perhaps to try and get more stimulus into that economy. So it does mean that, unfortunately, the economy may take a little while longer in order to recover. Of course, having seen that near 33% decline in the US economy just last week, it does certainly bode ill for that economy. Where things will go from here is going to be quite interesting, and perhaps more support will certainly be needed. So that filtered through into the Asian trade and saw a little bit of negativity, but there was some help from the Chinese factory data, which pointed to perhaps a better picture then with regards to recovery out in the Far East. So things perhaps looking better there, and that's where a sense of the positivity came from, which is why you saw a bit of a mixed picture on that front. So it did mean, for the most part, then you saw negativity and positivity across these main indices then as well. Even Australia perhaps faring slightly negatively to start off the day. But by the close of trade, the Nikkei and the Shanghai Composite managed to gain quite significantly then. The Nikkei 2.25%, 1.75%, should I say, then for the Shanghai Composite. So some good numbers there, with the Hang Seng certainly being the only one perhaps to go into some negative territory there. The positivity, though, from here has filtered through into the European market. So that's doing quite well, with a big gain for the DAX there, going up more than 2% on that front. So still many questions though around the recovery of many European nations, but the hope is then perhaps that more stimulus will indeed be coming back into the market. So it does give some sort of hope then as well on that front. What may also be of keen question is just the earnings numbers that perhaps will come out in due time, as well as we continue to see how things fare at the back end of that earnings picture out in the United States. So that may certainly tell us where things are headed there. Marginal gains, I suppose, if you want to call it that, for the JSE All Share, but we'll take it in any form or format. 2/3% to the good then for the All Share, sitting above 56,000 points there. A big gainer then for the gold counters then, as they go up 1.6% then, 1 7/10% as well for the JSE Resources Index. That certainly tells you then that investors still plowing into that resource space and seeing it perhaps as that safe haven trade. So continuing to perhaps look at that a little bit more. Of course, the stocks in that sector continue to do well. We also got word then out of Glencore, and then saying that they actually see their earnings climbing and doing even better for the 6 months to the end of June, which would bode well for them. A 3.2 billion rand estimate at the top end is what they see, and they expect that things may reach towards that top end then when it comes to their earnings for the 6 months. Ivan Glassenberg, indeed, the CEO, who's been at the helm for 12 years, if not actually 18 years, should I get corrected on that one. So certainly been there for quite some time. Still says, though, that the diversification of the business and, of course, their marketing division as well has certainly done well. Let's remember then, of course, that Glencore is one of those entities that actually trades in these commodities as well, which gives them quite a massive differential then when it comes to other mining or commodity-based entities as well. Overall, though, the financials not doing too well. Big fall on that front there. What we also got news of as well very quickly is the United States. Fitch Ratings Agency downgrading the outlook on the U.S. economy's AAA rating. That went from stable to negative. So believe it or not, even the United States does get a bit of a hit when it comes to, of course, the ratings agencies. Not necessarily as bad as our very own, of course, where we sit with 3 groups of negative or junk rated statings as well then from the ratings agencies. Onto the commodities board then, weakness across the board outside of palladium then, which has gone up nearly 1%. A slight decline though for Brent crude, but still hovering in the same region then. Of course, today becomes one of those first days where the Asian nations, or perhaps the OPEC nations, should I say, with some of their allies, which include Russia, have pumped back 1.5 million barrels of oil back into the market. So it does mean that there's even more supply into that market picture. More supply means that the price goes down then, of course. That's why it is slightly lower at around 1/3%. But demand continues to be weak, of course. More coronavirus cases out in the rest of the world, so not necessarily helping that price out quite a lot there. Platinum sitting firmly above $900 a fine ounce, but dipped below that early this morning as well. So big falls there, and perhaps not as much demand as one would have hoped for, while the gold price still hovers in and around that record territory. Not yet firmly at $2,000 a fine ounce, though. 1,971 is where it is right now. It's around 0.1% weaker thus far. And more weakness. We're back above 17 Rand, unfortunately, against the US dollar, folks. It's a more than 1 month high then, or weakness, if you want to call it that, for the local currency. 17.26 then against the greenback. It's 20.24 for a euro, and a pound is at 22 Rand and 47 cents. Bright Kumalo from Vestac Asset Management joining us now as well then via Skype. Bright, always good chatting to you. Hope you had a good weekend, but certainly wasn't a good weekend for the local currency. More than 17 Rand. We're back to that weakened state, unfortunately.
Yes, and this mostly has to do with the dollar index, right? When we spoke 2 weeks ago, we saw the dollar index at a 2-year low. And obviously, after the second quarter numbers that came out in those 2 weeks, and we're seeing basically, the dollar strengthening to say maybe there isn't a lot that is wrong with the U.S. economy, and it is going the right direction when it comes to the recovery, and it is shown by the earnings that these companies are actually releasing. So, I mean, we've seen the FANGs, all of them shooting the lights out. We've seen basically most of the companies that actually reported last week reported positive numbers after having, started with banks the week before, which didn't do so well. And it was quite expected considering that we're at the lowest of lows when it comes to, interest rates globally. And the United States itself, is seeing negative rates for the first time.
It certainly does bode ill then, I suppose, for the local currency. How much more weakness do you then expect? Is this pretty much it then? I mean, there's been that general recovery, but could there possibly be more weakness in that US dollar perhaps at a later stage, considering that economy isn't necessarily going in the right direction either? There's no plan with regards to that stimulus plan set in place as yet either. So perhaps more weakness in that US dollar perhaps at a later stage, meaning perhaps we get some strength locally as well for the rand?
Yeah, I mean, you look at those GDP numbers were, multi-decade lows, right? They've never seen a reversal so quickly, so fast. But we have to be, be cognizant of the fact that there has already been trillions of dollars spent in stimulus packages in the United States, giving everyone $600 a week. What's that? That's the equivalent of over 10,000. What? Yeah, it's thousands of rands basically in South African rands. If we had the equivalent of that, we would have people doing, somersaults on the streets here. And it's unfair to say they're not doing anything when it comes to that front. But we did see that, for example, the likes of the CEO of JP Morgan coming out and saying that this was just pushing down the road, right? These stimulus packages and the loan holidays that the banks were forced into offering their clients. So he was expecting that, it's going to take much longer in terms of, the economy to recover. And I think maybe you are quite right in saying that we will see that dollar index weakening again. But I'm not quite sure by how much, and whether it's going to come back where it was 2 weeks ago.
We seem to have varying fortunes as well then in the mining industry, Bright. 1 week we get, of course, word out of Anglo-American then as well. They give word that their earnings picture is very, very weak, unfortunately. Anglo Gold Ashanti gets a CEO for 2 years who then decides, I'm going to, unfortunately, leave for family reasons as well. And then you have Glencore, and they say, look, their earnings picture could actually be better than some of the others. So clearly, diversification, the aim of the game here.
I mean, it's a metal story, right? I mean, you mentioned the CEO of Anglo Gold Ashanti, right? He came in 2 years ago when metal prices were pretty low, and he he out-versified of South Africa, which doesn't make any sense why Anglo still has offices downtown here in South Africa, right? Because they no longer have an operating mine here in South Africa. And he's going to spend some time with his money, right? Because I'm sure he's calling the top in the gold price, because what is another better time to leave than now, right? Because the chances of downside in that metal price is higher in terms of probability than the upside, right? So it makes sense for him to say, look, family reasons, going to spend more time with my money. Thank you very much. Looking at other businesses that operate in, the commodities and, metals environment, like you said, the likes of Glencore are going to benefit quite a lot, and Sibanye still gold, because they've got a much better diversified portfolio as compared to, say, a single commodity miner like Harmony Gold or Harmony, I guess, is part of Sibanye, but I was just using that as an example. So it's going to be very mixed in terms of results, and you want to be in those commodities that probably are seeing a lot of upside today than those who are not.
Any earnings pictures you're sort of looking at then for the remainder of the week?
Yeah, I mean, today we saw ShopRite, basically it's up about 10.4% the last time I checked. The South African business still doing exceptionally well, up 9.4%, notwithstanding, the current pandemic and whatever is happening here locally. And they've said that they've spent about $19 million or 327 million rands in basically COVID-related costs, which is what we've been seeing with a lot of businesses, especially in retail, incurring these costs to ensure that the supply chain is, up to speed. I think the big news for ShopRite for me was the fact that they've divested out of Nigeria after being there for 15 years and not seeing real progress, right? This was the last of South Africa's business that had been, showed some hope in operating in Nigeria. The only one that's left there now is MTN Nigeria, just holding the fort there. But it just shows it's not as easy to operate in the rest of the continent as it is here locally. It's not just a copy-paste, business model. You have to understand the environment you're operating in and then do what works there. Don't just copy-paste everything across.
Certainly is the case, and it's something that we've seen really for quite some time. Really, companies continue to struggle in the rest of the continent outside of ShopRite in particular, whether it be retailers, whether it be banks as well, who continue to suffer as well. Bright, it's always good chatting to you though, but thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it. Bright Khumalo there from Vestec Asset Management joining us via Skype, helping us unpack that market picture. Just very quickly, as you can see at the bottom of your screen as well, the passing away, unfortunately, of Dr. Monde Mnyanda, who was indeed the chair, should I say then, of the Central Energy Fund. He was also chief economist at the South African Reserve Bank until the 1st of January 2013, also advisor to the governor at that stage. He has unfortunately passed away after a short illness at the age of 63. We'll hopefully try and get you a few more details with regards to that as well then, and his passing. In that case, he is or was the chair then of the Central Energy Fund in his latest position. Continues to, of course, hold quite a few degrees as well, and a real servant for South Africa's economy. We'll try to give you as much as possible with regards to that story as and when it does indeed come in.